Hi, I think I'm going to entitle this video What I Did Today. So what I did today was I repaired a customer's NuTone IM5000 Control Unit. The story on this IM5000 is the owner contacted me about 2.5 years ago. He had a lightning strike and the system went dead. We talked about what the repair would entail and so on, and I didn't really hear anything back. Sometimes people choose to have it repaired somewhere else. Sometimes people choose not to have it repaired at all. And then recently, the fellow contacted me and he said he needed to have it repaired again because it stopped working. And I was confused because I didn't know that he had had it repaired. So I asked him, what happened last time when you had the lightning strike? I need to know the backstory of the whole thing, because before I take on a repair, I like to know the history of the unit and what's been done to it and so on and so on. And he explained to me that he sent it to someone else to have it repaired, and they did repair it, and he got it back, and it worked fine, and he was happy with that, and that's all good. But here we are 2.5 years later, and the system is starting to have problems, and they're sort of typical, what I call age-related problems that you have with an IM5000. He had problems with the remote stations working correctly. There was a lot of static and crackling on the system, and there was times that it would work and there's times that it wouldn't work, and it was pretty clear from the description that the control unit was starting to have its normal failure. Now, I found this somewhat surprising because if it had just been worked on 2.5 years ago for a lightning strike, you would think that the majority of the types of things in an IM5000 that would need to be replaced would have already been done. But apparently that's not the case. I got it in and I took a look at it, and it was not non-functional. It did work. How well it works is a little hard to assess in the shop because we can't duplicate the 18 stations that he has. The most we can do is 7. I trust that he has enough experience with his own system that the descriptions of the problems are accurate, and it would be, for the most part, what I consider to be an unremarkable repair. It's just simply a matter of rebuilding the unit, and in the end, if you do the job properly, it'll all be good and it'll all work like brand new. As I started on the unit, I was somewhat surprised because what I found was, and this is the part that this is not a rant, at least it's going to try not to make it a rant. One of the things that I found, which I don't think I've ever seen before, is the previous shop replaced a bunch of capacitors in it, which is a pretty normal thing to do in an IM5000. When I pulled out a bunch of the capacitors, what did I find? Here's one of them right here. You won't be able to see it, I don't think, because it's so incredibly small. Maybe you can. It's a brand I've never heard of before. It's a Chong brand capacitor. That would be C-H-O-N-G. I have never heard of Chong brand capacitors before, and I actually found it somewhat amusing that anyone would use something like this. The other thing that I found very amusing was, like a lot of repair people tend to do, they put an overrated part in place of the original part. Now, what does that mean? Capacitors, for instance, have two values that are important. They have the capacitance, how much it can store. And a common capacitor in an IM5000 is 47 microfarads. And the original capacitors were 47 microfarads at the second rating that's important, which is the voltage, and that would be at 35 volts. Those capacitors in many sections of the IM5000 are the capacitors that tend to fail first, just like they tend to fail first in an IM5006 because they're basically the same design. So the person that worked on this unit that chose to use Chong brand capacitors, he chose to put in 47 microfarad capacitors at 50 volts. There's a saying in electronics which is, voltage is life. The higher the voltage within reason, the longer the component will last. However, that's not exactly always true. It's sort of one of those old adages that people say and people want to believe because buying a capacitor that has a higher voltage is an easy thing to do, and if you put in a capacitor with a higher voltage, you feel good about what you did because, well, I made it better, I'm doing everything I can because I put in a capacitor of higher voltage and it should last much longer and the world will be good. Well, okay, but What happens when you put in a capacitor of higher voltage, but it's made by the Chong company? So I did a little research on the Chong company. I couldn't actually find any place to buy their capacitors other than on some fairly large Chinese websites. So I'm not sure where this fella is getting these from. And also, there wasn't a lot of detailed technical information about Chong capacitors. Generally, what I gathered was they're not very good quality. One of the other ratings on electronic parts is the tolerance of the part. Most well-known brands of capacitors, they have a tolerance of plus or minus 20%, which is pretty standard. There are higher grades of capacitors. You can buy military spec capacitors and very special expensive capacitors, and they might have a tolerance of 10% or 5% or something like that. But for average consumer electronics, you don't need that. Chong capacitors, as near as I can tell from what I could gather online, which there wasn't a lot of information, they have a tolerance of 40%. And 40% is a lot, because if you think about it, it could be plus or minus 40% of 47. That's a big swing. That's more like capacitors in sets that you see that were made in the 50s and 60s, where the manufacturing quality of components is not nearly what it is today in 2019. It seems like an amusing choice that you choose to put an uprated component from a company with lower tolerance and questionable quality. So how much good did you really do? Well, it's a little hard to say exactly, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing a lot of detailed detective work into why the unit was exactly acting up the way it was. That's what I refer to around here as it becoming a science project, where the curiosity of why becomes more important than actually fixing the customer's unit. And we try not to do that here unless there's some really, really good reason to do that. And there wasn't in this case. Based on historical experience, the kind of problems that the customer was having with this unit when he contacted me has everything to do with the parts of the set that have Chong capacitors in them. I find it somewhat amusing. I find it somewhat disturbing. I also find it somewhat disappointing that when this unit was repaired 2.5 years ago, not only did they use outwardly shoddy components, they didn't really do a very complete job with the work that they did. They could have easily expanded the amount of work that they did. They didn't necessarily have to do a full-blown rebuild on a unit, but they could have expanded their power supply rebuild concept to include more parts of the set, especially the known trouble spots in an IM5000, because that would have probably made it last longer, and that way the owner of it wouldn't have to send it to me to have it repaired again. The other thing that I find amusing, disturbing, and disappointing is that when a repair shop is working on any piece of equipment, it's their responsibility to do the repair to the very best of their ability with the best practices that they possibly can. And I can tell you for a fact that choosing Chong capacitors don't fit into that model at all. Now, anyone who works on IM5000s to any degree should be very aware of the problem areas in the design, and also why the original components fail in the ways that they do. And when you're choosing replacement parts, you have to choose components that are best suited for the actual application, and Chong components don't do that. When we rebuild IM5000s, we have, or I should say I have, specifically chosen certain types of capacitors, for instance, that are best suited for this type of application. It's everything that we can do to try to stretch out the time interval between repairs on a unit that you know for a fact is going to need to be repaired periodically. Now, typically, an IM5000 will go 12 to 15 years, some a little longer, some a little less, but on an average, that's pretty good. Since you can't redesign the unit because that's not practical, the most that you can do is try to choose components carefully that will have an inherently longer life in the unit because of the application that they're being used in. Because what you have to think about is the IM5000 is primarily a big, sophisticated power supply. So if you choose components that are best suited to that application, odds are they're going to last longer. The other thing that I found amusing was, I'm going to guess that since electronic components of all brands and makes and models are readily available everywhere online nowadays, there are two major suppliers in the US that you can order virtually anything that you can imagine for to work on an IM5000. I'm going to assume that the choice to use Chong capacitors has everything to do with their cost and nothing to do with anything else. And the thing I find most interesting is that while I could not find exact prices for Chong capacitors because it just seems to be concealed to some degree, here's our little example here, as near as I can tell, this little capacitor probably costs somewhere between 2 and 3 cents if you buy them in like 100 lot quantities, which if you're in the repair business is what you would tend to do. As a comparison, if we look at, let's see if you can see, if we look at, I'll have to turn this for you. If we look at this little one right here, okay, same value, same ratings, okay, this name brand capacitor from a name brand company, one of the top 3 capacitor manufacturers in the entire world. Okay, well respected, well known, and specifically chosen for this application because it's a capacitor that works well in power supplies. This little capacitor right here cost me a whopping, I think it was 7 or 8 cents. I didn't look it up, I probably should have, but I didn't really think of doing that. I think it was 7 or 8 cents. So really, the difference between the two, it's about a nickel. And for the number of capacitors that were replaced with the Chong capacitors, the total savings in parts was probably less than $1. So really, are you going to compromise the integrity of your repair and compromise the integrity of your work and your reputation and all of that for less than $1? I never would do that. I'll tell you what, I would rather reach into my pocket and pull out $5 extra and throw it into the parts into a repair like this and eat the extra $5 if I know that what I'm doing makes it last longer and it's better. It's ridiculous. As you can see in the bag here, because I'm not going to dump all these out. People like it when I dump it out, but I'm not going to. These are all of the parts in a normal IM5000 rebuild that we do here at my shop. And we're not using any Chong brand capacitors, that's for damn sure. So I don't know, I find it very disappointing sometimes. I follow up on repairs that have been done previously on a fairly regular basis, and I see a lot of really questionable things. Now, if it's being done by, you know, Joe at Joe's TV and Repair, and he's not really a NuTone guy, and he's doing it because the customer begged him, please, please, I can't find anybody, and Joe did the very best that he could, and it's a fairly simple repair, I can give him a little bit of a pass on it. Because, you know, it would be like if somebody walked into my shop and begged me to fix a DVD player. I'm not really going to do it, but, you know, sometimes you get roped into doing things and you don't really want to. But if you're doing this on a regular basis and you're supposedly an expert at repairing NuTone intercom equipment, using Chong capacitors ain't going to cut it. And I find it very, very disturbing. So, it wasn't really a full-on rant. I didn't really get worked up. I tried to find some humor in the nonsense that I saw today because that's what I did today. I hope you found this interesting and perhaps it'll be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.